Good evening, everybody. My name is Gary Adamsen. I am the production manager for KULU Treks, and I will be your host this evening. I'm very excited to introduce our incredible panel for tonight's live event, which is How History, Location, and Adversity Inform, Inspire, and Influence Theater. Happily, I can say that we are joined tonight by cast and creatives from the Broadway musical Allegiance.
2 ounces where we're at.
First, we have Elena Wang.
Hi, how's it going?
Great. She was part of the Broadway company of Allegiance and portrayed Kei Kimura in the Los Angeles production in 2018. Elena has also been featured in At This Performance at the Green Room 42. Next, we have Telly Leung, who may be remembered, as Wes, a member of the Dalton Academy Warblers on Glee on Fox, as well as his roles on Broadway in Aladdin, Godspell, and Rent, and he portrayed Sam Kimura in Allegiance. Telly's also featured on many original Broadway cast albums and has released 2 solo albums of his own, I'll Cover You in 2012 and Songs for You in 2016. Our next guest is an advocate for the LGBTQ community, a social media mega presence, and part of that little sci-fi thing called Star Trek, Mr. George Takei.
Live long and prosper.
Yes. It was his personal experience as a child when his family was forced to relocate and live in the stables of Santa Anita Park before being sent to the Rower Relocation Center, the internment camp in Arkansas. That was the basis of Allegiance. Mr. Takei has also written a New York Times best-selling graphic novel, They Called Us Enemy. It's a stunning memoir recounting his childhood imprisoned within that American concentration camp during World War II. We also have 2 members of the creative team from Allegiance tonight, Mr. Jay Kuo, who is the composer, librettist, and co-author, and Lorenzo Thione,
Hi.
who is a producer and a co-author of Allegiance. So rounding out our panel this evening is Mark Montague, who is the executive producer of KULU Treks.
Now, also, both of our intrepid hikers, Kelsey and Richard Morat, send their best wishes and thanks from about 10,500 feet in the snow-covered mountains here in Wind River Range, which is the closest point of the Continental Divide Trail to Heart Mountain Relocation Center.
Hi, everyone.
I'm Richard.
And I'm Kelsey. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're sorry we can't be here, but I am so excited to have you as our guest for our very first live discussion event. As you're talking, we'll be hiking the Continental Divide Trail here in Wyoming, right near the Heart Mountain Relocation Center, which was where the story of Allegiance was based.
We want to thank you all so much for joining us tonight. It means so much to have such an incredibly talented group of people, like yourselves, here on our first roundtable discussion event.
When we first embarked on this journey, Allegiance was the story that basically embodied our whole mission, important art being created from place and history.
One of our missions at KULU Treks is to support and raise money for those who work or used to work in the arts and entertainment industry, but have lost their livelihood due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
We're so looking forward to more of these open discussions where on Zoom and Facebook Live, we can have real encouraging and safe discussions about the current arts industry and its needs. And we can have those with the Actors Fund, Actors Equity, other artists, and various artist organizations.
With your help, as was clearly stated in Allegiance,
Ishikara ishi.
mountain can be moved stone by stone.
So have a great time. Thank you so much again for joining us. George, Telly, Elena, Jay, Lorenzo, I'm so excited to come back and see what this discussion was like. Please think warm thoughts for us tonight. We will be up a snowy mountain. So,
Cheers, everyone.
thank you guys. Cheers.
Welcome, everybody.
Hey, thank you for having us.
Thank you for joining us tonight. I know that there was a discussion in the lobby of a theater about a show that would become Allegiance. So Can I just start by asking Lorenzo, can you tell us about how that meeting went?
Sure. I'm very happy to. It's also funny because we've told this story so many times in so many different instances that it literally has become mythology around the show. Different details have emerged. We no longer know if it's the lobby, the second row, which how many times we spoke. Did we go to dinner after? I don't know. Every time there's a little bit more. What really matters is that Jay and I we had never met George, and we were having sort of an evening at the theater, just like anybody would have, just enjoying a show. And, you know, like anybody would, if George Takei is behind you and starts speaking, you recognize that voice. And we sure turned around and said hello to George. And Brad, who was with them. And what's funny is that wasn't the moment when we spoke about allegiance or learned about the sort of background of George. It just happened by complete sort of coincidence or desire of fate, is that we would meet him again in a different theater the next evening, seating
It was fate. It was fate.
Yeah.
To the point that we now know Brad literally thought we were stalking them, but that was not the case. Literally, fate put us together. And yeah, you know, sort of making conversation around the show we were seeing that evening, which was In the Heights. George kind of told us about how much of the themes of the show and the relationship within it reminded him of his family, and kind of started telling us this incredibly emotional sort of story about what
I got goosebumps when he was telling it. I knew I was hearing a story that was a great story, the kind you rarely hear first person from someone who actually lived it. It was incredible.
And it literally, you know, something triggered within us, and we could not stop talking about this and the story and everything we had learned. And we kind of spent the next few days kind of digging into as much of that history as we could before we took the chance of writing an email. I still have that email. I actually found it in the archives of my email the day we started rehearsals for Allegiance on Broadway, and I read that email to everybody. And we just kind of reached out to George and said, look, you have no idea who we are, but you inspired us to kind of take upon ourselves to kind of learn and want to explore this subject. And we think it would make an absolutely tremendous musical that we would like to bring to Broadway. And I think just a little bit with the idea of finally telling that story to as many as people as we could reach, George took a chance and said, sure, let's look at what happens. And that started us on a path that took a long time and a lot of development and readings and workshops and world premieres, but 7 years later landed us at the Longacre Theater on Broadway.
So that would lead into my next question, which is for George. Why did you decide that a musical would be the best way to tell your story in Allegiance?
Well, it wasn't me that decided it. Jay is the musician, a composer, lyricist, and I remember we were at the theater watching In the Heights. And there's near the end of the first act, the father sings a song, Useless, because he loves his daughter very much and he can't help her. And that song was so moving. And that song reminded me of when I became a teenager. I was 5 years old when we were incarcerated and 8 years old when we were freed. And so as a teenager, as a preteen, I think, I was very curious about the imprisonment and to know more about why and how my parents felt about the whole thing. And that song reminded me of my father's anguish when he said, he looked at his, well, I was the oldest, 5 years old. My brother was a year younger, 4 years old, and my baby sister was an infant. And he'd see us and look at the barbed wire fence, and it tore him apart. He had so much hope for his children. And now here we are, incarcerated and categorized as enemy aliens, which was totally irrational. And our imprisonment was irrational because we were innocent. We had nothing to do with Pearl Harbor. We were Americans. My mother was born in Sacramento. I was born in Los Angeles, as were my siblings. My father was born in Japan, but he was brought over to San Francisco as a kid, and he was reared and educated. He was a San Franciscan in every way except for birth. And here we are imprisoned. And what is going to be happening with his children? And what really pained him was not knowing what his children are going to, how they're going to turn out, and what this imprisonment is going to do to them. And that song brought that conversation back to me, and I just started sobbing. And then, of course, the intermission comes, and Lorenzo and Jay come clambering over knees to talk to us, and here I am quickly wiping the tears off my face. And that's how the sharing of that story began. And Lorenzo,
I sold you on the idea of a musical right there, I think, George.
Well, actually, the musical is organic to the story, because one of the things my father said was, if we're going to survive this, we got to be resilient. But resilience isn't just teeth-gritting strength, swallowing the ugly taste. It's also creating our own happiness and finding beauty. He went out into the swamps and sawed off one of those undulating tree stumps growing out of the water, and sawed it off and boiled it, peeled the barks off, and made a beautiful Mother Nature sculpture. And they had dances in the mess hall. Our barrack was the first one across from the mess hall. And I remember hearing the big band music sound and the music of the 1940s wafting over the night air. My mother put us to bed early, so we heard it in bed. But music was organic to the resilience of the Japanese Americans.
I'll also add that as the official archivist and historian of everything related to allegiance, I can tell you that one email that Jay and I sent to George a few days after we had met, where we started talking about this project, contained a demo of the first song that Jay had written from the score, which is no longer in the show. But that generated. What
song is?
That generated a response from George, saying that he had tears in his eyes and that absolutely felt the emotion that would tie the audience to that show.
We learned George cries easily.
I'm a cheap cry.
I cry more easily, but George cries quite easily.
In that way, we're kindred.
Yes. As producer here, Jay Lorenzo, what were some of the obstacles that you encountered during the creation and evolution of Allegiance?
Besides Brad Takei? No, I love Brad. I'm kidding.
I do too. Why did you consider him a hindrance? I depend on him.
Go ahead.
One of the big things was that, Lorenzo and I were new to the business. And so we had to, luckily, because George was known through his television and film roles, that carried a bit of cachet. And because of George, people were willing to listen to us. I mean, who were we at the time? And because of George, Lea Salonga opened her email. Right? And because George Takei, it turns out she's a Trekkie, You know, like we wouldn't have gotten Leia, you know, but for that. But it was, you know, in a way, it kind of mirrors to me how Asian Americans generally meet a lot of obstacles when they're sort of trying to climb the ladder in entertainment and tell our story. I mean, a lot of the obstacles were that, you know, this hadn't been done before. This story wasn't known. These people weren't known. These actors weren't, you know, besides George, weren't big actors. So, no, that was some of the initial challenge. But, you know, the flip side of that is that we had an incredible community behind us, an incredible supportive community, really willing to write checks and attend our readings and be gung-ho and fill our social media. It was you know, that was the flip side of that.
So I have a question for Elena. Because you had a firsthand account of everything that happened from George, how was your task of creating a realistic and honest character made easier by that?
Oh my gosh. I mean, having George there every single day was absolutely invaluable. And in fact, yes, I played Kay in the Los Angeles version, but in Broadway, I played a feature role. And there was a story that really came to mind. This particular feature role had to deal with a newborn. So how do you deal with a newborn being relocated in the camps? And I remember, you know, during rehearsal, having a sit down with George, and this was something that really, really struck my heart. And he said, you know, I was really used to seeing little boxes, which essentially were coffins of babies that wouldn't have survived in those harsh environments with little to no medicine. And it's not even just as an actor, when you listen to something like that, it strikes you. It's just as human nature. And so these are the things that as an actor, then you try to bring into that role and translate that to the audience. How do you actually relay something like that? The emotion and the gravity of that. But the beauty is, it's not just a personal experience. Is George was there from day one with the writers, with the creatives, developing the story every single moment. And so you see it captured in the images. You see it within the story, how it's written. And I remember this one lady came up to me after the show, and she was also incarcerated. And she said, there was this image of all of you having taken one suitcase, and you were in the train on the way to the relocation camps, and it brought back all of my memories as a teenager, having to pack my entire life in one bag. And she got emotional and she cried. So you see that, and it's prevalent throughout the entire story. So absolutely invaluable to have George there.
So a follow-up to that would be for Telly. Was the creation of your character of Sam informed by George's interpretation of Sam, or vice versa? Or did Sam come into existence symbiotically between the two of you?
You know, well, really, you know, I started with the show in 2009, so I had been with it for 5-6 years until it actually premiered on Broadway. And the Sam you saw on Broadway has evolved every time we did a reading or a workshop or took the show out of town. It was almost like we were doing a brand new show. So in many ways, I think the strength of Allegiance is that it's an original musical, not based on any previous work. And so it's truly an original musical. But the challenge of that is that our authors here had an epic, you know, decades of history to be able to tell, and which stories do you pick to really create that quilt, that whole picture, right, of what that period is and what's going to be effective in a 2.5 hour musical. So I don't know. I know I don't know if George feels it this way, but every time we came back to do a reading again, or every time we were going to do the next version of Allegiance, I tried to treat it, you know, as if it was a new piece again, because I wouldn't know sort of what changes had come. And I think that what was great was we had a company of actors that really worked well together in that way, that we just said, okay, let's try it. This version, Sam is now a little older, and in this version, I don't have a mother in this version anymore, and in this version, he graduates law school. In this version, he doesn't. Yeah, so you know, every time we approached the piece, it was different enough for us to really have to work off each other, to create it all over again, you know,
And
until we
that's
got to the version we came to in Broadway.
That stayed true all the way through Broadway previews, because Telly was getting new versions of entire songs from one day to
Oh
another.
my gosh, that's
That's
so
just-
true.
but that's-
Telly
but,
was
you know-
such a hero on those moments.
That's sort
And
of
the
what you
thing is-
sign up for with original musicals. You know, that's part of the deal.
And the character of Sam Kimura is a fictional character. You know, if you're doing someone that existed, you know, you might try for the accent that he had or his gait, but it's a fictional character. And Telly has the most stage time. So, you know, working together over a long period of development time, it organically grows. I mean, I just imagine myself young like Telly. I wish I were as young as Telly. And now Telly knows what he's going to look like when he's old.
Telly had what his vocal coach called the alphabet track.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. Oh, God. Well,
But it was a really rewarding experience to develop it with George in that way, you know, and the piece, you know, as you're telling a piece of history like that, it reveals itself sort of. I think of it as a quilt, right? That's made up of patches. And every time we went back to the quilt, it was like, oh, remove that patch, put this patch on. Because when you look at it from a distance, it's going to look different and it's going to look like a different piece of art. And so it was that process of going, okay, which patches are we going to use to make this quilt? And what do we end up with at the end of it was so rewarding.
that's a really great way of looking at that. I like that. That's a nice analogy.
A lot of sewing. It was actually a sewing song that was in
We opened Act 2.
It got cut, thank God. I don't know why we had those women sewing.
Well, you know, happily, what you guys have done was captured in a pro shot, and now there's a DVD box set that everybody can see this show who's not lucky enough to see it on the road or on Broadway. It's really like a carefully curated box set. There's 2 DVDs in it, right? One of them is the show, and the other one is the documentary, Allegiance to Broadway, that details the creation and the evolution of the show. Plus, there's all this other stuff that's in there. You've got different posters and the souvenir book that was designed for the set. You've got mementos. Oh, and there's also the commentary with George and our producers on the DVD. I will say this: it looks fantastic, and you guys should check it out. We'll have the email, the website link to check out the DVD set. But if you're writing it down very quickly right now, it's dvdset.allegiancemusical.com. I highly encourage you to check that out because it's well worth the price, and it's an amazing piece of Broadway history and American history that we don't get to talk about that often.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
This last week was watching George's Facebook tape of him unboxing the set as well.
Oh,
Absolutely.
You know, we have, I don't know how to explain it, but every time we decided to do something like filming the show or even creating this box set, it was always coming from a place of affection for the experience and the journey that we had traveled. Because when we realized that we needed to close the show on Broadway, everybody realized that that group of people in that room creating that experience was never going to happen again. And that was the impetus behind kind of saying, let's preserve this and figure it out later, where and how and who might want to see it. And even when we decided to create this box set, we thought about all the people, all the staff, the creatives, the investors, everyone who had poured a piece of their soul into making sure that this story could be told, and thought, what would be something amazing for each one of us to have and to keep as a memory of that decade we spent creating the show. And so, yeah, what you call, what you see in that care and in that sort of variety of different things. I mean, even the documentary contains some incredible moment, one of which has all Elena in it, because it's when we found her, when we did auditions in LA, and she came into the room, and we were all so absolutely amazed that we offered her the part right there and then on the spot, and it's all captured on tape during the documentary.
I remember that. I remember that. I remember Stafford actually our director sending me a text going, "We just met this girl in Los Angeles. She's out of this planet. Was so excited by you." And to have your audition captured on video and now preserved forever. I have to say, Lorenzo,
that's really rare. That's crazy.
It's really rare. And I have to say, Lorenzo, I think it's really amazing that you've captured it in this way. I grew up in New York City. My first Broadway show was not live. I watched great performances, and I watched Into the Woods. I watched the original company of Into the Woods on great performances. Bernadette Peters, Joanna Gleason, filmed live at the Martin Beck. That was what made me want to do theater. So the fact is, the show ran 4 months on Broadway, but now that it's been preserved, there's generations of people that will outlive us that will watch this. And who knows what, if that inspires the next, Elena or Telly or Leia or George,
I want to say
generations
that
from
all
now.
the Asian American actors and actresses out there who are young and thinking, there aren't the roles. There are. We are creating them. We are telling our stories. And this was the first, Asian American written and directed show on Broadway. And that was a milestone for us. And it was also a story that had never been told on a big stage. So, and I have to add that, when we decided to tell the story, we initially thought that it would be a history lesson, that we'd be talking about our past. But as we opened on Broadway, we realized we were talking about our present, and the importance, the contemporary importance right now of our story, and what it means to be American, and what it means to lose your liberty and to lose your rights in a swing toward authoritarianism and fascism, even in our own country. To think that could happen again, and is happening today.
Is happening.
Yes.
Is happening. It is so relevant. When 9/11 happened, I was chilled by the reaction of this country, because it was the same kind of reaction that this country had after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. This fear that swept across the country, and how it resonated in all of the legislative bodies, the city councils, the state legislatures, and the United States Congress. On the floor of the U.S. Senate, I looked it up in the history books, but there was a senator from Tennessee, Senator Tom Stewart, who made the statement that any Japanese in this country will stab you in the back. How many Japanese, first of all, would a senator from Tennessee know? I would venture to say 0. And yet they felt they had license to make statements like that. So this is as a matter of fact, we have an election coming in 35 days. When we were on Broadway in 2015, and the candidates for the presidency were all running in their respective parties' nomination, Donald Trump made the statement, all Muslims must be totally and completely banned from coming into this country. Just like they said, all Japanese Americans are potential spies, saboteurs, or fifth columnists. He insinuated that all Muslims were potential terrorists. And when he got into office, the first thing that he did on the first executive order he signed was the Muslim travel ban. But this time, there were enough educated people that recognized that. Sally Yates, our Deputy Attorney General, said she will not defend that. And so that first executive order attempt was nullified. He made another attempt that was nullified, but the third attempt succeeded. The Supreme Court backed up, stood behind that Muslim travel order. And the irony of that is, at that same session, the Korematsu judgment was erased from the records. Korematsu was a young man who challenged the internment all the way to the Supreme Court, and this amazing attorney, Wayne Collins, was the lawyer for that bill, and he fought all the way up to the Supreme Court. And in 1944, in the middle of a war, he lost. Korematsu lost. And it's that judgment has been on the Supreme Court record until 2015, when the Supreme Court backed up the Muslim travel ban, and at the same time they said it's a disgrace that we have the Korematsu ruling still on the record, and they erased it. So the same mentality still exists today, and that's why allegiance is so relevant. And we're talking as if allegiance is history. No, it isn't, because Lorenzo and I have been talking about another production of Allegiance in London, and 2 weeks ago I happened to be on Good Morning Britain. Thank God for this thing called Zoom. So I could be here in Los Angeles and do Good Morning Britain. And we talked about allegiance on the West End. And Lorenzo, we got to keep pursuing that. We must do allegiance. And there's a lot of interest in this subject in Britain. And
well, a couple of things. One is absolutely. The second is, in the meanwhile, there's allegiance performed in a number of other places. We're so fortunate that Allegiance will be in Tokyo. All
in March.
Japanese in March of next year, of 2021, just as hopefully people will be able to attend theater shows again. But also
in Japanese, translated it.
Yep, all translated.
I have no way to judge it.
Also,
I want to be there to judge it, but they won't let us in. Americans can't go to Japan.
I know we will have to deal with figuring that out. But also to what George was saying, with respect to the then presidential candidacy of Donald Trump, not only there were sort of the eerie and disgusting parallels made, between what had happened during the internment and the rhetoric against immigrants and people from Islamic countries and all of that, but he went so far as refusing to say whether or not the Japanese internment itself has been a bad thing, and that he didn't know because he wasn't there. So he couldn't have judged whether or not it was, after all, such a bad thing. It was so inconceivable, and very much one of the reasons why we wanted to tell this story is because way too many people don't know, never bothered to learn, and sort of are even surprised at the human impact and elements of that story, that we invited him to come and kept a seat open for Donald Trump for every performance from that day in which he said that disgusting thing all the way until the day we closed. And while we knew he probably would have never come, enough people posed for selfies with his open seat with the reserved sign for it, that at least we hope the message arrived that there was a way for him to have learned how terrible that chapter of American history would have been if he just had come and watched it.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember the night that there was a Trump staffer there on a very particular night that came. I don't think he sat in the Donald Trump seat, but he happened to be there the same night Gloria Steinem was there. And I was told that Gloria Steinem gave this young man a piece of her mind.
Well, I'm glad that they paid for a seat.
Yeah. Actually, a friend of mine, his family went through the experience as well in I think in Wyoming actually. And so when people on the southern border were put in cages and being rounded up and everything, he actually went down with a couple other activists to try and protect as many as possible, to try and stop that from happening. He actually had gone personally to one of the churches that was acting as a sanctuary for an individual, and he and this other lady actually went into the church and escorted out this gentleman arm in arm into a car, keeping away all of the ICE officers and as well, to be able to get them safely into this transportation and get them out of there and into safety with representation. But yeah, he's continuing to.
It's so corrupt. Steve Bannon, now we know, has been trying to raise funds, GoFundMe, to pay for the border wall, but they hired a friend who's a contractor to build it, and it was built, 3 miles of it, but already now the ground underneath it is eroding, and there's a great big gap underneath the fence that he's built.
It's like an allegory for the Trump administration.
It is.
Well, we're getting a little further into time here. I do want to bring it back a little more into the story here too. Now, one thing I'm experiencing here on the road with the hikers and everything, we're also going into a lot of these historical locations. And one thing we're finding that, we had preconceived ideas of what the stories were about, what the people were about, what the places were about. And then coming to the actual location and learning so much more about the diversity that's there, as well as the different perspectives that were happening there on the place and that informed the history, has certainly reshaped our preconceived ideas of the people, the place, and the story. And I'm curious, when you've actually visited the Heart Mountain Relocation Center, how did that change your preconceived ideas of the story and the characters, and how would you approach it? And Jay and Lorenzo, maybe.
Well, so I didn't have preconceived notions because I visited a good number of. We were first taken from our home to the horse stables of Santa Anita Racetrack. The camps were still being built, so that was our temporary imprisonment. Can you imagine, for my parents, we went from a 2-bedroom house on Garnet Street in Los Angeles to the stench of a horse stall, still fresh with the stink of horse manure, taking their children to sleep in that horse stall. We were there for about 4 months, and then we were taken 2/3 of the way across the country to the swamps of Arkansas. These camps were all in the most desolate places. There were 2 on the desert of Arizona. I visited the camp there called Poston. And then after we were imprisoned, first of all, they impoverished us. They froze our bank account, and so my father's business was ruined. The bank took our home away because we couldn't pay the mortgage, and then they imprisoned you, and we were innocent, and there were no charges and no trial, and they imprisoned us in some of these most desolate places. And then a year into imprisonment, they realized that there's a wartime manpower shortage. Right after Pearl Harbor, young Japanese Americans, like all young Americans, rushed to their recruitment centers to volunteer to serve in the military. That act of patriotism was answered with a slap on the face. They were denied military service and categorized as enemy aliens and imprisoned. But then a year after imprisonment, they needed us. How to justify drafting enemy aliens out of a barbed wire prison camp to serve in the U.S. military? The next and outrageous, irrational demand was that we all respond, everybody over the age of 17, respond to a loyalty questionnaire. A loyalty questionnaire. There were 2 questions that became very controversial. Question 27 asked, will you bear arms to defend the United States of America? this being asked of my parents. How were they to answer that? They were being asked to abandon their children and bear arms to defend the nation that's imprisoning their children. It was preposterous. Question 28, the next question to which they expected a yes answer, was one sentence with two conflicting ideas. It asked, will you swear your loyalty to the United States of America and forswear your loyalty to the Emperor of Japan? The Emperor of Japan. We're Americans. We never even had thought of a loyalty to the Emperor. So if you answered no, I don't have a loyalty to the Emperor to forswear, that no applied to the first part of the very same sentence. Will you swear your loyalty to the United States? If you answered yes, meaning I do swear my loyalty to the United States, that applied to the second part, meant you're confessing that you had been loyal. It was a sloppily put together questionnaire. And my parents answered no to those two questions. And because of that, we were transferred to a high security camp called Tule Lake, which is symbolically the most nefarious, the most evil, cruel, and the biggest of all 10 camps. Most camps had anywhere from 6,000 to about 10,000 people. Tule Lake had 18,000 people, people who were already enraged and outraged by that relentless assault on their dignity.
You know, when George told me this story, and we realized that we wanted to include it all in the musical. You know, it's a highly challenging and complex story. Politically, there were people coming down on both sides, people who wanted to protest against their incarceration, people who wanted to go along with the United States and prove that they were true Americans and brave. Both sides were equally right. And we decided that schism in the community would form the backbone of the schism in the family, that the parts that Telly and Elena have played. You know, and to this day, the Japanese community is still split over what happened in those camps. You asked about Heart Mountain and how we felt upon arriving at it. You know, it's not until you set your feet in a place that you feel its bones. You feel all the, you know, if you're spiritual in any way, you feel the energy around it. You know, if you're not, you at least feel the history and the tug of all of those people who had come there before. And they've done a marvelous job at Heart Mountain recreating a lot of the scene. But it's just having that mountain looming there, you know, there were songs written about that mountain in the show, also cut. But you know, it meant a lot to me to stand in the shadow of that and to carry. I realized, you know, we were carrying this story forward, and that thanks to what Lorenzo has done, it's now preserved forever. As a historical piece, as an artistic piece, and that's a tremendous thing.
Absolutely, and it's wonderful. I know you've done a couple of things for the Actors Fund as well, and E2E Treks. We've partnered with the Actors Fund since the beginning of this, because of their work in helping the industry during this horrible pandemic. Now, Telly, I know you're very involved with helping promote the Actors Fund and their work. Can you tell us what about the Actors Fund really speaks to you?
I mean, the Actors Fund, well, first of all, I always say yes to my Allegiance family, and I always say yes to anything that's the Actors Fund. So tonight sort of felt like the perfect, you know, way to spend a Monday evening, right? But the Actors Fund is an amazing organization. For my friends out there who are listening who don't know about it, it's been around since 1882. And it's called the Actors Fund, but actually, it is an organization that helps everybody in the entertainment industry. It doesn't matter if you're on stage, backstage, in the pit, you know, in the fly rail, if you're an usher, if you're working in the box office, anybody that's connected to the entertainment industry, it is sort of our emergency relief fund. And since March of this year, since performing art venues have been shut down, they've given, I want to say, over $16 million worth of aid and helped out over 10,000 people. And they're an incredible organization. And for all the folks who are watching out there, I encourage you, if you can find it in your heart and find it in your wallets. I know it's a challenging time, but all of us in the entertainment industry are sort of facing an unknown, a real ambiguous time right now. We have no idea how and when we get back to what we know of as normal. It's sort of whatever is next normal, right? I don't know if we'll ever go back to what it was, but I think, you know, whatever's ahead is sort of blurry and unknown and sort of scary for a lot of people. And so they've really been there. They give free healthcare to people that don't have health insurance. You know, I've had people who've all of a sudden become sick, you know, and have to get chemotherapy, and they're right there to be like, you can't work, here, let us help you pay your rent. I mean, no questions asked. They're an incredible organization. So I hope you'll continue to support them. They're at actorsfund.org. They're great.
And it's interesting that you brought some of those things up, because one question that I wanted to ask all of you, that Telly just alluded to, was, what's the future of Broadway and live theater now?
The vaccine. When that comes, we'll have theater back.
Yeah.
And I'm absolutely convinced that it's a human need to see other human beings on stage telling a story that connects with them, to see the spittle and the sweat on their brow. It is coming. The scientists tell us that it's probably going to be sometime early 2021.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, during this time, there's also been, I'm also really proud of my community for coming up with fun and innovative ways to keep storytelling alive. Yes, nothing will ever replace the live theatrical experience, but there is some amazing work. People are, and oftentimes benefiting, great organizations like Actors Fund, people doing free performances and things. Just as artists, we have a deep need to tell stories. We have a deep need to make music. We have a need to connect. If that means I'm connecting with you on Zoom, like that's what we get right now, but it doesn't mean we can't share our stories. So I encourage you to, you know, if you're an actor out there feeling frustrated that there isn't live theater, yes, hopefully with science it'll come back soon, but there's also some really incredibly creative things happening all the time, you know, during this pause.
Absolutely, and that's a good core of what we're doing with KULU Treks as well, is utilizing the divide as sort of the arch for the journey, but creating new platforms for all artists, not just actors and singers, but also painters, sculptors, poets, any range of things, to be able to find out about history, new stories, other stories that they're not necessarily aware about, but to give them something inspiring to actually start getting their creative juices going again while they're safely hunkered down until that vaccine comes out. But a means of getting that exercise going and actually getting exposure as well. We have a Create page where anybody can submit their work on there, and we can get them featured and get them out there and have more conversations like this as well.
So one last question. What inspires you guys now? What's inspiring you to create now?
And how does COVID affect your creativity with it?
Well, you know, I find myself with a lot of more free time, and I'm not somebody who deals well with a lot of free time and a project. So I decided to write my family history in a novel, I've done a draft. It's called Ma in all caps, because that's how she writes her emails to me. And the first draft is done, and I'm excited. I'm about to turn to working on the script of our musical in development, which is called Indigo. It's a unique story centered around a teenage girl on the spectrum. And again, a story that's never been told on the Broadway stage. We love to tell stories of people who are underrepresented. And we have the wonderful honor and privilege of working with the first principal actress who is also on the spectrum for this role. So we need a nationwide search for that. And Madison Kopech is just wonderful. She's from South Bend, Indiana, where so I'm doing the libretto for that, and Lorenzo is also working on the story and lead producing. So that's what we've been doing.
Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting for me, because we were talking about how we're trying to navigate this new normal, right? And for me, I've actually taken COVID as a sign to pivot into what I believe is my greater purpose for now, which is to create an online mindset alignment coaching program, which is going to be available for everyone in the world, which is to, how do I look within and find the power within me to create my happiness, to create my new normal. And it's really interesting because as I've been creating this program, I've been getting a bunch of people saying, you know what, I want to already delve into what you've already created, go with you, validate it with you. And within the span of 2 weeks, we've seen amazing artists, people who've been wanting to leave their 9-to-5, people who've been looking at transitions and not understanding how to navigate that, go from, you know, the depths of depression into, oh my gosh, I can't believe it, I'm attracting amazing international opportunities, or oh my gosh, I can't believe it, I left my 9-to-5 and I'm now creating unapologetically. And so it's been an immense honor to help others around the world to look within and say, how can I create? How can I make this ripple effect into the world and help others as well? So, and I want to take this opportunity to say, if you're watching this and you are feeling lost and you're hitting the depths of depression, you're not understanding where to take those next steps, definitely go to my handle. It's at the Ellie, Ellie, Wang, Wang. Feel free to DM me, and I actually offer free discovery calls where I can offer you actual answers and specific ways in which you can already shift and make all of that happen. So, yeah.
I think this time where theater is paused, you know, I've had to come to a reckoning where I go, oh, am I still an actor if nobody's paying me to do it? Like, am I still a storyteller? Do I still make music if I have no theater to perform to, and if it's not in that the traditional ways we think of doing it, right? And so for a little while you sit in the depression of that, and then you go, you know what, but it's just because that doesn't exist doesn't mean I have to stop doing this. It's a part of what I've done. Would I be doing this if it wasn't also the means by which I make a living and pay my bills? Yes, I still would be doing this. Somehow I'd find a way to do it. So I've sort of I've partnered with one of our wonderful producers on Allegiance. His name is Elliot Maisie, who's sort of a guru in the world of learning and development. We just started doing Friday happy hours on Zoom through his corporate circles with a lot of learning and development people to talk about the need for empathy. So we call it, we just call it empathy. You can register, it's a free event. And he says, why don't I bring some learning people from the L&D world, from the corporate world, who are dealing with having to furlough employees, lay off employees, downsize companies, all of that. How do you have those conversations? Of course, then with COVID, then turning into how do we have sensitive conversations and meaningful conversations around Black Lives Matter? How do we have reasonable, sensible conversations when people are very politically divided? So this empathy conversation has morphed, but he says, who better to have a conversation about empathy than actors? It is our job to be empathetic. We are someone else. Every night, 8 times a week, I take myself out of myself and I walk in somebody else's shoes. So this melding of corporate people, learning people, we've done 20 of these. We've also made them a benefit for the Actors Fund. So we've also raised money for the Actors Fund by doing this as well. Oh, and now we're doing a fun, now we've decided to produce a 45-minute Zoom-sicle, we call it. The whole thing is virtually made. It's going to be free for people to watch over Christmas. An original musical made, that we're shooting right now in our own green screens and recording from our home recording sessions. Yeah. So we're still making art happen, whether or not we get paid for it.
This is exactly what we're talking about. Is everything you see, everything you touch, everything you hear, has once came from somebody's imagination. Mm-hmm. And we have to remember that. We can't play the victim to another circumstance where we're just saying, oh my gosh, I'm lost. But at some point we find resilience. It's Gaman, right? Out of this beautiful song of Allegiance. It's everything that we see and have experienced has come from somebody's mind. And so how do we tap into that internal power and say, this is who I am. And so let's together create our new normal. So that's super awesome, Telly. I love that.
I love what you're doing.
We are blessed with this incredible technology called Zoom. We didn't have it last year. For me, in February and March, when all the gigs that I had on my calendar started to cancel on me, I was concerned. But my career began with dubbing in English dialogue to foreign films. And that career has been revived in so many different ways via this technology. I've done play readings. As a matter of fact, one of them we did for Jay and Lorenzo, the Silver Foxes. It won't be realized until the vaccine comes. But I've been doing voiceovers. I've been doing these wonderful children's animated that you do voiceovers. That's what I was promoting on Breakfast and Good Morning Britain. Good Morning Britain. And we've been doing so many things. It's really keeping me so occupied that I'm beating some of them away because my voice is getting hoarse. But it's a lot of fun, and thank God for this. It's always important to be grateful for what you have. And this generation is blessed. I mean, here we are in confinement, and Brad and I being in this vulnerable generation, we are strictly going by the protocols, except for the only time we go out of the house is at 6 a.m. in the morning. We go out for a 45-minute walk in the neighborhood, and we're here keeping busy. Brad, after breakfast, Brad goes into his study and does his thing, and I go into mine, and I'm kept busy on Zoom. And then we break for lunch, and then we get back to our studies. And then at night, we watch old movies that we didn't see, or series that we TV series that we missed that we're binging on. We're binging on The Tudors. Oh. I'm an Anglophile, and that's 10 years old, but we're seeing it for the first time. And Jonathan Rhys Myers is such a hunk, but he doesn't look like Henry VIII at all. No. Just last night, Anne Boleyn lost her head over him.
Oh, so you're right in the middle of it. So good. Oh, just wait.
Jane Seymour has made her appearance.
Yeah. And not the Dr. Quinn Jane Seymour. Yes. yes. Well, guys, I really want to thank you for joining us tonight. I know we had to do this very quickly, and we tried to cram a lot into a short amount of time, but I would like to thank the Company of Allegiance, George Takei, Telly Leung, Elena Wang, Jay Kuo, and Lorenzo Thione for joining us, and for joining Mark and I tonight for what will be the beginning of many of these artist roundtables to help raise awareness and to benefit the Actors Fund. One of the things that I know we want to make sure of is that please visit E2E Trek's website, e2etreks.com, and see all the ways that you can donate to the Actors Fund and to other charities that we are helping to support on our trek down the Continental Divide Trail during this incredibly difficult time. Oh, and don't forget to check out Allegiance's Pro Shot DVD gift box experience by visiting dvdset.allegiancemusical.com. Again, all of that information, everybody's contact information and social media information will be on our website and our social media so that you can all make your contacts.
Yep, right on the page it has links to everybody, all your individual links. Missing out, Louise.
Yes. So again, thank you guys so much, and thank you for our audience who joined us tonight. And I look forward to seeing you guys very, very soon.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
This is my social distancing.
Yes.
Live long and prosper, and stay back. Stay back.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Oh.